It was a quiet February morning in Kunming, the capital of China's Yunnan province. The Lunar New Year had just ended. Most students had gone home. The university dorms stood silent under the winter light. In one of those dorms, Building 2, Room 317, a custodian unlocked a door that hadn't been opened for days. The air inside was heavy and damp. Something about it felt wrong. A faint, sour odor lingered, growing stronger near a large wooden wardrobe pushed tight against the wall. The custodian noticed that the wardrobe had been sealed shut with layers of black tape, and from the bottom of it, a dark, sticky liquid was slowly seeping onto the floor. He called security. A few minutes later, 2 guards pried the wardrobe open. What they found inside would horrify an entire nation. 4 human bodies were stacked inside the closet, pressed together, wrapped tightly in black plastic and electrical tape. Their faces were covered. Their hands were bound. The smell of death filled the hallway as officers staggered back in shock. When investigators checked the student records, the realization hit them hard. The victims were all students from Yunnan University's School of Life Sciences. They were classmates. They lived together in that very room. Room 317 was not a dormitory anymore. It was a burial chamber. By noon, police had sealed off the entire floor. Forensic investigators began working in silence. There was no sign of forced entry, no blood on the walls, no evidence of a struggle. Whoever had done this had acted carefully, deliberately. The killer had taken his time. But one thing stood out. There were 5 beds in that room. 4 of them belonged to the dead. The 5th bed was neatly made. The desk beside it was organized. Books stacked, papers arranged, pens aligned. The student who lived there was missing. His name was Ma Jia Jue. At first, the name meant little to the officers. When they pulled his file, the image was jarring. Top of his class, a scholarship student, winner of national science competitions, known for his discipline and quiet manners. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. To most, he was the picture of promise, a boy from a poor rural village who had worked his way to one of China's top universities. But now he was gone, and his 4 roommates were dead. Police began piecing together the last few days before the murders. The dorm manager remembered that Ma had stayed on campus through the holiday, along with a few other students. He'd been seen playing cards and chatting with his roommates just days earlier. Nothing about his behavior had seemed strange. Inside his desk drawer, investigators found a hammer, its handle smeared with traces of blood. Next to it lay a half-used roll of black tape. In a corner of the room, a plastic basin held murky water streaked with red. The evidence was undeniable. This was no robbery. Nothing valuable was missing. This was personal, planned and executed with chilling precision. By the following morning, the story had swept across the campus and beyond. News crews gathered outside the gates. Students cried openly, struggling to believe that one of their own could do something so monstrous. Professors called it unthinkable. Newspapers began referring to it as the dormitory horror at Yunnan University. That same day, the Ministry of Public Security issued a nationwide manhunt notice. The suspect's name, Ma Jia Jue, age 23, appeared on posters across China alongside a photograph of a thin young man with sharp cheekbones and distant, unreadable eyes. A reward of 200,000 yuan was offered for his capture. In a matter of hours, Ma Jia Jue went from an obscure college student to the most wanted man in the country. People asked the same question again and again. How could a brilliant student, a young man described as polite and quiet, turn into a killer capable of murdering his own friends? To understand what had happened inside Room 317, investigators would have to go far beyond the walls of Yunnan University to the place where Ma Jia Jue's story began, a small, impoverished village in southern China. A childhood built on silence, pressure, and isolation, and the slow, invisible unraveling of a mind no one really knew. To understand what drove Ma Jia Jue to kill, investigators turned to his past, a life that began far from the world of university classrooms and laboratories. He was born in 1981 in a small farming village in China's Guangxi province. The village was poor, surrounded by fields of rice and sugarcane. Electricity came and went. Education was considered a luxury. But even as a child, Ma stood out. He was quiet, distant, almost painfully shy. Teachers remembered him as the boy who never smiled. Yet behind that silence was a remarkable mind. He learned quickly: math, chemistry, biology, anything that required logic and focus. His teachers praised him. His classmates admired him. His parents saw him as their one chance to escape poverty. Ma's father, a factory worker, and his mother, a homemaker, pinned all their hopes on him. They pushed him relentlessly, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. In their eyes, success in school meant salvation. For Ma, failure was not an option. He studied late into the night, often by candlelight when the power went out. He rarely played outside. His world was small: a house, a desk, a stack of books, and the pressure grew heavier with each passing year. By the time he reached high school, Ma was competing at the national level. He was known for his near-perfect exam scores and his withdrawn nature. His classmates respected him, but few really knew him. He didn't talk about friends. He didn't talk about dreams. Everything in his life pointed toward one goal: getting into a top university. When he was accepted into Yunnan University's School of Life Sciences, his village celebrated. His parents wept with pride. Their son, the boy who came from nothing, had made it. But what they couldn't see was the shadow forming inside him, a growing resentment, a sense of alienation that would later consume his mind. At Yunnan University, Ma was no longer the smartest person in the room. He was surrounded by students from wealthy families, from big cities, confident, fluent, social. He tried to fit in, but his soft rural accent and awkward manner made him an outsider. His clothes were old, his shoes were worn. His classmates joked about his frugality. Some called him the country boy. To them, it was harmless teasing. To Ma, it cut deep. He began to retreat further into himself. He studied obsessively, avoiding social events, skipping meals to save money. His roommates said he was polite but distant, always serious, never relaxed. Over time, a quiet bitterness took root. He saw the laughter in the dorms, the easy friendships, the dating, the weekend trips. To him, it was another world, one he could see but never enter. He started to believe that people were laughing at him, not with him, and that belief grew into obsession. In his diary, later recovered by investigators, Ma wrote about humiliation and betrayal. He wrote about classmates who looked down on him and how, "One day they will understand my worth." There were no violent threats, no explicit plans, just a cold, meticulous buildup of anger and despair. Those who met him described a man who seemed almost invisible, quiet, emotionless, expression fixed. But beneath that calm, something had begun to fracture. His grades slipped slightly. He blamed others. He believed the world was rigged against him. Professors favored rich students. His roommates mocked his poverty. His achievements went unnoticed. Isolation turned into paranoia. In the winter of 2003, Ma began accusing his roommates of plotting against him. He believed they had read his diary, that they were gossiping behind his back. He told one classmate, "They've been laughing at me for months. They think I don't notice." But no one took him seriously. They thought he was just stressed. Another overworked student losing his balance. They didn't see the anger hardening inside him. By February 2004, Ma had stopped attending most classes. He rarely left the dorm. He barely spoke to anyone. Yet, in the silence of that small room, his thoughts grew darker, colder, more deliberate. And one night, after a game of cards turned into an argument, something inside him broke. The mask of the quiet scholar was gone. What remained was a storm waiting to be unleashed. February 13th, 2004. The Yunnan University campus was nearly empty. The spring festival had sent most students home. Only a handful stayed behind, those who lived too far to travel or had nowhere else to go. Among them was Ma Jia Jue. He spent the day alone in the dormitory, shuffling cards at his desk, staring at the walls. The air was still, heavy. Outside, the faint echo of fireworks drifted from the city, celebrating the new year. Inside room 317, the mood was different, colder, quieter, waiting. That evening, 3 of Ma's roommates returned from dinner: Deng, Yang, and Gao. They were friends, ordinary college boys, tired from exams, laughing, teasing one another as they came in. Someone suggested playing cards. Ma agreed. They sat in a circle on the floor, dealing the first hand. The game began lighthearted, with the kind of small talk that fills quiet nights. But as the game went on, tension crept in. A sarcastic comment. A joke that landed too hard. One of them, Deng, according to investigators, joked about Ma's test scores, calling him too serious to ever win at anything. It was meant to be nothing. But for Ma, it was everything. He felt the heat rise in his chest. The years of humiliation, the laughter, the whispers, real or imagined, came flooding back. His heart pounded, his breath tightened. He smiled faintly, pretending not to care. When the game ended, the others got ready for bed. Ma stayed up, staring at the cards on the table. His roommates fell asleep one by one, the room going dark, except for the faint glow of the hallway light. At 1:30 a.m., Ma stood up, quietly, slowly. He reached under his desk and pulled out a hammer. He walked to Deng's bed first. One swing, then another. The sound was wet and final. The others stirred. Half awake, confused. Ma turned to them before they could react. In seconds, panic filled the room. One tried to run, another screamed for help, but no one heard them. The dormitory was silent. Ma struck again and again until the movement stopped. When it was over, he stood in the dark, breathing heavily, surrounded by what he'd done. Blood had spattered across the wall, the sheets, the floor. His hands trembled, but his face was calm. In a later confession, he said he felt nothing. He looked at the bodies, his roommates, his friends, and began to clean. Methodically. He washed the hammer in a basin. He wiped the walls. He wrapped each body in black plastic and layers of tape, one after another, working through the night. By dawn, room 317 looked almost normal. The beds were made, the floor scrubbed, the wardrobe sealed tight. But there was still one more roommate, Lee, the 4th man. He had been away for the holiday. 2 days later, Li returned. He opened the door, dropped his bag, and asked Ma where the others were. Ma smiled faintly and told him they went home early. That night, Li fell asleep in his bed. Ma waited until the lights went out. Then he picked up the hammer again. By morning, 4 men were dead. For 2 more days, Ma stayed in the dorm. He ate, studied, even played computer games, all with the bodies of his roommates sealed in the closet behind him. He told no one. But soon the smell became impossible to hide. Neighbors noticed it first, then the custodian. And by the time the police opened that door, Ma was already gone. He had packed his things, a small backpack, a few hundred yuan in cash, and vanished into the countryside. For the next 20 days, China's most wanted man moved through the shadows, blending in among travelers, sleeping in train stations, eating instant noodles, changing his name when he could. But no one could outrun what he'd done. And when police finally found him, hundreds of miles away in the mountains near Sanya, he didn't resist. He simply looked up at the officers and said quietly, "I knew you'd come." When police opened the wardrobe in room 317, they didn't just uncover 4 bodies. They uncovered a mystery that shook the entire country. 4 students, all murdered with the same weapon. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. And 1 missing roommate, a quiet, brilliant young man named Ma Jia Jue. By the afternoon of February 23, 2004, his name and face were on every major news broadcast in China. Posters went up in train stations, post offices, and police precincts across the nation. A reward was offered, 200,000 yuan for information leading to his arrest. At first, there were no leads. Ma seemed to have disappeared without a trace. Investigators retraced his steps from the moment he left the university. Security cameras showed him boarding a train heading south, carrying a black backpack and wearing a gray jacket. He kept his head down, his expression unreadable. He moved like someone with nowhere to go, but nowhere to hide either. He changed trains several times, traveling through Yunnan, then Guangxi, then into Hainan province, an island off China's southern coast. He slept in internet cafes, at construction sites, and on park benches. He bought instant noodles, sometimes surviving on a single meal a day. Witnesses later described him as calm, polite, and strangely peaceful. It was as if the act of killing had emptied him. He wasn't running in panic. He was drifting, like a man waiting to be found. The national manhunt intensified. Teams of officers were deployed across provinces. His photo was shown on nightly news, his story dissected in newspapers. The case became a mirror for a nation, raising questions about mental health, academic pressure, and the dark side of obsession. Then, on March 15th, a small clue broke the silence. In a remote mountain village near Sanya, a fruit vendor noticed a young man sitting under a tree, staring blankly at the ocean. He recognized the face from a wanted poster taped to a wall nearby. When officers arrived, they found Ma still sitting there, alone, holding a small radio. He didn't resist. He didn't run. When asked his name, he said quietly, "Ma Jia Jue." And then, "I knew you would come for me." During interrogation, Ma's calmness unsettled even the most experienced officers. He spoke clearly, without hesitation, as if describing something that had already happened to someone else. His tone was flat, detached, almost polite. He said he had planned the killings for weeks, that he had bought the hammer, the tape, and the plastic bags days before, that he'd chosen the night carefully when the dorms were quiet and no one would hear. But when detectives asked him why, his answer was chillingly simple. "They humiliated me," he said. "They thought I was nothing. They laughed at me. I wanted them to stop." He claimed his roommates had mocked his rural background, called him stingy, teased him for being poor. Investigators couldn't verify how much of that was true. Some classmates said they remembered only harmless jokes. Others said Ma had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced everyone was against him. In his mind, those small moments had become unforgivable crimes. He described the murders without emotion, how he struck each victim, how he cleaned afterward, how he stayed in the room for 2 days. His face remained blank, his voice steady. At one point, he told officers, "I didn't want to kill them all, but once I started, I couldn't stop." When asked if he regretted it, he paused for a long time before answering. "I regret that they laughed," he said, "because if they hadn't, this wouldn't have happened." Psychologists who examined him described signs of narcissistic rage, a combination of fragile self-esteem, deep resentment, and an inability to process humiliation. They said he wasn't insane. He knew exactly what he was doing, but he lacked empathy. He saw people not as humans, but as symbols of everything he felt deprived of. Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Li Huan summarized it bluntly. He killed his roommates to destroy the image of himself they reflected, the weak, unwanted outsider. When investigators finished questioning him, one officer asked if he had anything to say to the families of his victims. Ma looked down at the table and said quietly, "They should understand I was in pain too." It was the kind of statement that silenced the entire room. By late March, Ma was flown back to Kunming under heavy guard. Students gathered outside the police station just to see the man who had haunted their dorms for weeks. Some shouted curses, others simply stared, trying to understand how a face so ordinary could hide such violence. In the days that followed, the crime scene photos leaked into the press. The sealed wardrobe, the blood-stained hammer, the diary pages filled with bitterness. For the families of the victims, grief turned into fury. They wanted justice, and the Chinese courts would deliver it swiftly. When Ma Jia Jue was brought to trial, the courtroom was silent. No cameras were allowed inside, but those who attended described an atmosphere heavy with disbelief. Not anger, not even fear, but confusion. How could someone so young, so intelligent, so seemingly gentle, commit such an unspeakable act? Ma sat at the defendant's table wearing a plain gray prison uniform. His head was shaved. His posture was straight. Throughout the proceedings, he spoke little. When he did, his tone was soft, calm, almost eerily detached. The prosecutor read the details of the crime, 4 counts of first-degree murder, with evidence of premeditation. They listed every step: the purchase of the hammer, the rolls of tape, the bags, the cleaning afterward. Each fact chipped away at any doubt. The defense offered little to argue. They described Ma as a brilliant but socially isolated student who had suffered years of psychological pressure. They asked the court for leniency, not forgiveness, but understanding. They said he was not evil, only broken. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photographs, the confession, the timeline, they all told the same story. This was not a moment of rage. It was a plan executed with method and control. When asked to speak in his own defense, Ma stood up slowly. He didn't apologize. He didn't cry. He simply said, "I failed in life. I wanted to end my pain. I chose the wrong way." Then he sat down again, eyes lowered, as if he'd already accepted the outcome. The verdict came swiftly. On June 24, 2004, Ma Jia Jue was found guilty of 4 counts of intentional homicide. The sentence: death. When the judge announced the ruling, there was no reaction from Ma. He didn't look at the audience or at the families sitting behind him. He just nodded once, faintly, like a man who had been expecting it all along. Appeals were filed automatically, as required by law. They were denied. The court found no grounds for reconsideration. On June 17, 2004, less than 4 months after the murders, Ma was executed by lethal injection in Kunming. He was 23 years old. After his death, investigators searched for meaning, something to explain how a gifted student could transform into a killer. They found fragments, diary pages, letters, half-written essays. In one note, Ma wrote, "I always wanted to be seen, but the more I tried, the more invisible I became." For many, that line became a haunting symbol of what the case represented: the unseen pressures, the silent anger, the fragile balance between pride and despair. In the wake of his execution, Chinese universities began reevaluating mental health programs and counseling for students. Professors were urged to pay closer attention to those who seemed isolated, but for 4 families, the lessons came too late. Room 317 was sealed permanently. The dormitory was later remodeled, its walls repainted, its number changed. Still, students said that at night, they sometimes avoided walking past it, not out of superstition, but out of sorrow. Years later, those who had known Ma still struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet young man with the brutality of what he'd done. A classmate said, "He never shouted, he never argued, he just smiled." But maybe that was the scariest part. We thought silence meant peace. The Yunnan University dormitory murders became more than a tragedy. They became a warning, a reminder that genius does not protect against loneliness, that intelligence without empathy can turn cold, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones who look dangerous, but the ones who look just like us. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest horrors. 2 decades have passed since the murders at Yunnan University, but the story of Ma Jia Jue still lingers, not as a tale of blood, but as a study in silence. He wasn't a monster from the beginning. He was a boy who worked hard, who carried his parents' dreams, who longed for recognition in a world that barely saw him. Somewhere along the line, that longing turned into resentment, and resentment into violence. It's tempting to see him as an anomaly, a rare burst of madness. But the truth is harder. His story reflects something that exists quietly around us every day: the crushing weight of expectation, the loneliness hidden behind success, the way small humiliations can grow like cracks beneath the surface. In every classroom, in every workplace, there are people like Ma, silent, watchful, retreating further into their thoughts. Most will never harm anyone, but some, left unseen for too long, begin to unravel. The tragedy of Room 317 isn't just that 4 young men lost their lives. It's that a 5th one lost his humanity long before that night ever came. When the police asked Ma if he had anything else to say before his execution, he paused for a moment and said softly, "Tell them I wanted to be understood." No one truly did. And perhaps that's the saddest part of all.